Good afternoon, good morning, y'all. I'm Omar Abubakar, and I'm a senior software engineer. I've been working on Salesforce for a while now. Most of my experience in Salesforce has been focused on payment integrations and payment gateways. So today we're going to talk about payment gateway integrations with a concentration on CyberSource. I'll not be showing my IDE or the business manager for the sake of client privacy privilege. So yeah, let's start the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's put a stake in the ground and start by addressing the elephant in the room. What is a payment gateway? Many of you might not really know what payment gateways are. So here goes the definition. Payment gateways are services that authorize credit card processing. That's it. That's sweet, but what does that mean exactly, right? In a nutshell, payment gateways are responsible for authorizing payments on the site. That's it. Payment gateways have one and only one critical job, and that is to allow users to pay online, okay? Now, there are a lot of payment gateways out there with different features and different limitations. For example, we've got Stripe, Square, Skrill. There's also Adyen, now trending, and CyberSource. Some of you might know some might know all, and some might know none of these. So the $1 million question would be, what's so special about CyberSource then? To answer this question, we need to make a little comparison. I know CyberSource integration is very time-consuming, and trust me, many developers and ITG have faced this issue a lot. And other payment gateways have faster and simpler integrations with e-commerce sites. But other gateways heavily lack at detecting fraudulent activities. This is a very important feature, and I can't really stress enough how much this feature is important. Okay, especially for major retailers. If you think about it, major retailers get high load of orders, not even daily, but at an hourly basis. So to elaborate a bit on this, because this is a very important point, sometimes some people would try to use a stolen card. Or might use a low-ranked card. And by low-ranked cards, I mean cards that have low credit score, maybe, or try to impersonate other people. And that's where the fraud detection of CyberSource kicks in. This is one of CyberSource's finest features, to be honest with you. They actually make videos about this for advertising purposes. Fraud detection uses certain patterns and algorithms to kind of flag high-risk transactions and cards. The other important deciding factor on why CyberSource is one of the best payment gateways out there is the parent company. The parent company of CyberSource is Visa. Visa has acquired CyberSource in 2010, I guess. Not sure, but I believe 2010. And it has always been, Visa has always been a leading company in the banking sector. So all the new updates get pushed to CyberSource faster than any other payment gateway. So that's why major retailers go with CyberSource. And by the way, CyberSource is a legacy solution. It has been always there for a long time. So familiarity is another reason why major retailers pick CyberSource. Okay, so enough talking about the concepts. Let's hop to the technical side of the integration. Now, it's not going to be, for now, it's not going to be a technical integration, let's say, tutorial per se. It's going to be a high-level integration first. Okay. Once you decide to start the integration process, CyberSource will provide you with the out-of-the-box plugin. The out-of-the-box plugin is a separate cartridge that contains all the necessary POJOs with plain old Java objects, DTOs, the data transfer objects, logic, service definition files, WSDLs, service calls, and jobs. Then you might think, what do I need to do then? If everything is provided, what's my job? Your job is to configure, customize, and connect this toolbox that you have with the code base of your client. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, you might think, but not so much. Let me tell you why. CyberSource is a huge solution. I can't truly demonstrate how huge the solution is. Some projects, even the easiest projects of CyberSource, may take up to 100 plus hours. But I hope by the end of this session, you'll have a good glimpse on the size of the solution. For now, let's take the integration step by step. First, what we need to do is to set up a payment processor. A payment processor is, let's say, we need to define a payment processor. So to actually tell Salesforce that we have, we actually support CyberSource on our side. So the first thing that we need to do for the payment processor is that we need to create it, and the name should have the following convention. As you can see, let me just pull my laser pointer here. Okay, so as you can see, the first thing we should have the vendor underscore credit card. The payment processor should have this naming convention. It should have the vendor name, that's CyberSource, underscore the method name, which is credit card. And once we do this, we need to create a payment method. The payment method is, it should leverage the payment processor that we have just created. The payment method, as you can see, is credit card, and it should be enabled, as you can see. And now it in here, it should use and leverage the processor that we have just created. Down here, we set all of the credit cards and the debit cards that we're going to support. So if you're going to support Visa, Amex, Discover, you should list them down. Okay. Okay. So that's on how to configure this from a high technical aspect. Let's move on to the code for a bit. So once you set up all of these payment processors and the payment method, what you need to do is to create a new pipeline. This pipeline should actually be the processor pipeline. It should have the same name as the processor, and as you can see here, it shares the same name with the payment processor that we've just created. This to indicate to Salesforce later on that this pipeline will be the one that handles all of the operations for this payment processor. This pipeline should actually handle 4 main operations. It should create the payment objects, and we're going to talk about these in detail later on. It should build the request, then it should call the service, and finally, it should parse the response that we get from CyberSource. Now, if we go into the authorize, for example, it's going to call another pipeline, and in here, and by the way, I just chose pipelines because you can see the sequential steps that we've taken, better than Zephyr maybe. The first things that we're doing here is that, as you can see, in the first step, we're creating the objects. It's all CyberSource data, as you can see. CyberSource data, create build to, create ship to. And build to and ship to is the, both are the billing and the shipping addresses. The payment cards, the purchase totals. Later on, we're gonna analyze the request that we send to CyberSource, and you're gonna see this in higher detail. In step 2 here, okay, in step 2 and 3, this script node actually builds the request for the authorization call, and then it calls the service itself. Okay, so these are 3 main functionalities out of the 4 that we've done. If you scroll down, you're going to see the 4th functionality. After we actually do the call to the CyberSource service, CyberSource will return some arguments that we're going to inject as parameters to the PDECT. And using those, we can parse the response to understand and to decide if the card is authorized, if it's declined, or if it has an error, okay? So these are the main 4 steps that the processor pipeline should do in order to finally handle the payment. Okay, after that, we're gonna create a mapper. The mapper class is one of a kind. It's actually a mediator between the real logic, the real SFCC logic, and the payment processor that we have. The mapper the main functionality of the mapper is to decide what payment processor should we take. So it takes the parameters that we have on the side that we've passed to the request, sorry, and it should decide what pipelines should handle this request. So let's assume that a user is going to PayPal. It's not logical to send him to the CyberSource processor pipeline, right? So in here, these are all logical nodes that will, and as you can see, this node, this pipeline call is a dynamic one. So once we do all of these checks, we know what pipeline is the correct pipeline that we should go. So this mapper maps the request with the corresponding pipeline processor. This mapper can, after we build it, we can really inject it in other Salesforce pipelines like the checkout place order. So you just go there or the create payment, the submit payment, sorry, where you can just add the start node and it will integrate gracefully. Okay, most of CyberSource requests are built upon SOAP because, as we mentioned before, it's a legacy solution. So to properly call the service, we need to properly set up the service definitions, files, WSDLs, and to build all XML requests strictly adhering to the service requirements. I'm not going to go into much detail in here because Amr Qasrawi did a very good job in detailing how to create a SOAP service in a previous session, I guess. So if you guys can refer to his session on how to create SOAP requests and how to handle the WSDL files, it will help you immensely in this. Okay, so to recap quickly, what we need to do to get CyberSource working is to create a payment processor and a method from the business manager. Then we need to create a pipeline for the new processor, which we called a processor pipeline. Then we need to create a mapper that detects what's the type of operation and maps it to the corresponding processor. And finally, we need to integrate that mapper into the SFCC logic that we have. Okay, this is the first questions break. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. No questions, guys? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so after we get everything working, we need to look at the services that CyberSource provides. CyberSource provides lots of services, but each one of those will fall under one of these categories. The pre-call services, and these are calls that happen to provide certain critical data to later calls. Example would be a payment tokenization. The main call services, these are standalone services. Example would be an authorization. And post-call services are services that are related to fraudulent activities and decision manager related services. By the way, guys, don't worry about all of these jargons. We're going to go over each one of those later on. Okay, like the payment tokenization, we're going to talk about it right now. Okay, so what is a payment tokenization? We've talked about it as a pre-call service, but what is a payment tokenization? So as a security measure, and before we really go into this, once we want to create, we want to enter our payment information on any site, you need to have a field that has the credit card number, right? And the expiry date and the CVNs. That's the way that has always been. But as a security measure and for PCI compliance reasons, sites are obligated not to pass or to save plain or encrypted credit card numbers into their systems or their objects. So database, objects, whatever. Uh, for example, you can't save any credit card number, not even encrypted, into your site. That's not PCI compliant, and that's not secure. Therefore, CyberSource tokenizes the payment. But what does tokenization mean? A payment token is an encrypted value that combines the card number, the expiry month, year, and merchant ID. The merchant ID is a unique identifier that specifies the seller for the site. So maybe you're thinking now, okay, but isn't a token is still an encrypted value? How can we save it, right? That would be a valid question. But a payment tokens that we get from CyberSource, we don't have the private key for it. So there's an encryption that we don't really know how to break it in our systems. And CyberSource's databases are pretty much have more security than any other payment system in the world. So you gotta like take their word for it. But the thing is that it is more secure, and because it is built upon multiple factors like the number, the year, the expiry date, and the merchant ID, each card, even if it's even the same card on different sites would have a different token ID. So that's why it's more secure. If you go into the site for now and you enter this, CyberSource will, we will make some calls to CyberSource, and we'll go into that into much detail right now, later on. But the thing is that if CyberSource will return a token to the site. This token is called credit card token in Salesforce. In other in other e-commerce systems, it's called subscription ID. And I'm mentioning this because later on in the XML, you're gonna see subscription ID being used. This token can be saved in the database and can be passed to the subsequent pages with no security concerns. Also, and this is very important, this token can replace the credit card number. So you can pass this token to CyberSource, and I'm gonna show you one example of a token later on. But you can pass this token to CyberSource, and CyberSource will implicitly know that this is the card number that corresponds to this token, okay? Let's look at how we send this request to CyberSource. I have omitted some lines from here because it contains severe information for my client. I'm keeping the service. And here we're calling the Flex service. The Flex service is a way on how to get tokens, and we're going to talk about different ways of getting these tokens later on. But this service, we're calling CyberSource to tell it, hey, we want a token. And then the token response we get is what we call a Flex token. The Flex token contains, and as you can see, it's a JSON object that contains the token, the masked pan, the card type, and the signature, okay? The token is the token that we've talked about. And if you notice closely, the last 4 digits of this token corresponds to the last digits of the credit card number. It's always going to be that way. Okay. The masked pan is a masked value of the card. It shows the first 6 digits of the card and the last 4 digits also. It's going to mask the ones in between. The card type specifies if the card is a Visa card, MasterCard card, or Discover, or Amex, or whatever. Okay, so we've talked about multiple ways of tokenizing these payments. We have Flex. This is Flex. And we're going to talk about Flex in higher detail, but let me first elaborate on the other tokenization services that we have. We also have the Simple Order API, which is a legacy software. It's still used out there heavily. There's also the iframe tokenization. The iframe tokenization is a bit deprecated. It's not officially deprecated, but not a lot of clients use it because it was the first one, I guess, to be used. And the latest method is the Flex API. What does Flex API mean? The Flex is, once you go into the site, you should, as we mentioned, you should see this form to indicate where you can add your credit card number and information. Now, all of these fields will be coming from our side, from the Salesforce Commerce Cloud side, except for this field. This will be injected from CyberSource via an iframe. The iframe will only contain the credit card number and nothing else. So once the user enters any number in this field, excuse me, we will not be able to have access to it. So we will only be able to pull the CyberSource token that CyberSource returns to us. And that's a security measure that CyberSource included in the Flex API, making it very handy. Okay, let's move past this. And after we return the token, we have now everything, all the information that we need. We have the expiry dates, we have the card holder name, we have the credit card type. Everything that we want is ready, and we have it. So we need to get into the authorization call. And for that, the first stop is creating the payment objects. And the payment objects are called payment instruments in Salesforce. They are simply DTOs, data transfer objects, and by data transfer objects, I mean objects that have private variables and multiple setters and getters. The whole objective of this payment objectives is to the payment instrument, sorry, is to hold credit card information like the credit card number if it's available, the credit card token, the expiry date, the holder name, etc., etc. In SFCC, we have two types of payment instruments. We have the order payment instrument and the payment instruments and the customer payment instrument. The customer payment instruments represents a saved credit card. Usually it doesn't contain the credit card number, neither the masked PAN. It's just going to contain the token. And it's only associated with a customer object. And the sole purpose of this is to represent a saved credit card. The other type is the order payment instruments. And these represent a credit card that is being used in an order. And this type of objects can be associated with basket objects and order objects. Okay. Okay, so how do we create the payment object? I've added two ways of creating this, using pipelines and using Sephora. I've done this because I want to show you guys how close these implementations are. So if we look at the pipeline steps, you're going to notice that both of these, by the way, both of these flows are actually the same, but for different card types. So let's focus on this. The first thing that we need to do, this script node creates a payment instrument. So it creates an empty DTO, nothing. It's just creating the payment instrument and setting it out there. Now, the next node would be to call the Flex service. And the Flex service, what it does is that it calls CyberSource and requests a token. And once we have this token, we can then we have all the information that we need. So in the last step, we're gonna populate all of these values into the payment instrument that we've just created. If you look at Sifra for now, you can see that here we're creating a payment instrument, just setting the payment instrument type, which is a method credit card, and the total cost price. After that, we're pulling this is the first step. The second step is to populate it out of a temporary payment instrument object. And this basket payment instrument is connected to the order. So it's actually the same. Okay, so let's look at once we have all of these, we have only one step missing. So to recap, let's just look at what we've done. We created the payment instrument. We've called for a tokenization. We have everything that we need. We have a populated payment instrument at hand. So what we need to do is to authorize the order. And to authorize the order, we need to go and understand the code that we have. I've pulled this out of the IDE because this is kind of, I've split it out the areas that are confidential to my client. And when we try to call an authorize method, it should be done through a helper because there are, as we mentioned before, CyberSource provides multiple services. So we need to have a helper that each method of that helper would do a certain job. For that, we'll only look for the authorized credit card method. Now, the first thing that we do here is to check if the card is a saved credit card or a new credit card. If it's a saved credit card, then we populate the billing fields out of the payment instrument, the customer payment instrument that we have. And later on, we do certain things like the authorized payer. This is an optional feature. I've worked with clients having this feature as enabled, and I worked with clients who have it as disabled. So we're not going to go into it. So let's jump to the hook-in 3D request, which contains the main lines of this authorization call. And here we're trying to pull to create a CC auth request, which means an authorization request. You go here and we're going to see the same things that we've talked about in the pipelines being applied in here in Sifra code. So as you can see, we're now creating the objects, the bill to, ship to, purchase. Then we're populating those, as you can see. So we're creating the objects, populating it, and then the whole code that we have here is to create the response that adheres to the WSDL files that we have. Okay, so we can really send it to the SOAP service and get a valid response. After doing certain jobs, we really need to find the line that actually calls the service, and it should be here. So we're calling the CyberSource transaction service. We're setting the merchant ID, the service request that we have, the credentials, and then we're calling the service response. And if you actually compare this to the pipeline call, this is exactly the same. After we do the call, CyberSource will return some parameters that we need to parse, and we're doing that right here. So here's a success scenario, for example, and here's an error scenario. Okay, still the same as the pipeline request. Okay, let's go back to the now. Once we have the response from CyberSource, it's going to be three main decisions that we get from CyberSource. CyberSource might accept, reject, or review the transaction. By accepting the transaction, CyberSource actually accepts the amount and authorizes the transaction. If it rejects the card, then the amount will not be authorized out of your card. It's just a rejection. If it's a review, the card will temporarily be accepted and the amount will be authorized, but it will indicate later on to the merchant that this operation might need further security measures. So the merchant can automatically select if he wants to reject or accept the order. Okay, and because the amount was authorized, if the merchant tries to reject the order, we are going to do a refund to that specific user. Okay, we have another questions break. If you guys have any questions regarding the topics that we've covered, please ask. Okay. Okay. We have analyzed this process from a technical standpoint, but what does authorization actually mean? We've seen it in a technical aspect, but in business terms, what transaction really mean? We have lots of transactions available via CyberSource, but I have picked the main four. You're gonna hear a lot of these names if you work on a CyberSource ticket. And to understand the difference, let's take this example. You go to Amazon and you buy a certain household item for 100 bucks, for example. The seller, from the seller. This is called an authorization. Once you click place order, your bank will send you a message saying that that 100 bucks was deposited from your account or something like that. That means that authorization really means that the amount was taken from your account, but it didn't really move to the seller's account yet. It's reserved by the bank, still with the bank. Okay? If the seller, after a while, the seller will tell you that, notify you that he shipped your items. Therefore, he actually finalized all the obligations that he has with you. And for that, he asks the bank to capture it because everything went well and he wants the money. So he tells CyberSource that I want a capture request. That means that the seller wants to take the money out of the bank's reservation and set it in her account. Now, once the bank actually sends the money and deposits it and credits it to the seller's account, then this is called a settlement. Okay? A settlement means that the seller has now the money in his account. The final authorization that we have, the final transaction that we have is the reverse auth, which means authorization request, but in reverse. So it means a refund. If the seller was not able to ship your item for any reason, he's gonna ask the bank to refund you with the amount of the transaction, and that happens through a reverse auth. Now, one thing to note is that authorization and authorization request is always the first request that we have in any flow of the transactions we do with CyberSource. So authorization will always yield us a transaction ID that will be used later on in the subsequent calls with CyberSource. Any further transactions with CyberSource, you should indicate the transaction ID. So once you do the authorization, you get a transaction ID. If you want to do a capture, you should tell CyberSource that I need a capture for this authorization request. Okay, and the transaction ID is the one value that actually maps all of these transactions together. Awesome. This is a recap. If you guys, I'm going to share these slides, so it's just a recap of what we described in the previous minutes. Okay, the anatomy of a CyberSource request and response. We've talked about the SOAP services. We've talked about the XML that we want to send to CyberSource. And we've talked about creating the CyberSource objects and about the about all of these things, but we've not seen the request and response in action. So let's take a look at the request, and I've omitted all of the vital informations like the username or the password. Anyways, so here is a request. This is an authorization request that we usually send to CyberSource. As you can see, we're in the body of the response. First of all, in the header, we're sending the merchant ID and the credentials. In the body, we're sending the merchant ID, the merchant reference code. The merchant ID, we've talked about this. This is a unique reference for the seller. The merchant reference code usually means the order number. Then we have the build to object. As you can see, this is the ship to object that we've seen we've seen the code creating. Both of these are represent the addresses. So as you can see, street one, city, state, postal code, whatever. And here, and please note that we're sending some information like the IP address and the build to. We're going to talk about this later on. Now, we're also sending the items that we've bought on the site. And as you can see, the shipping has a line item because in CyberSource we don't have a specific item for the shipping, or we don't have a specific note to shipping, so we send it as a line item. And later on, and down there we see the card object. This card object actually contains all of the information that we entered in the market form. And as you can see, we have the full name, the expiration month, the expiration year, the CV number, and the card type. But there's one thing missing, if you can notice, is the card number. So where is it? If you look down a bit, it's going to be the subscription ID that we have. And it's correctly, it's called a token, but we've mentioned that other e-commerce platforms call it a subscription ID. So here you can find the credit card number. Okay. Once we send this XML to CyberSource, we're going to get something like that. It's going to return the reference code for the merchant and the request ID. This is the transaction ID that we've talked about. So any further contact with CyberSource regarding any other subsequent calls should indicate the request ID. And CyberSource returns a decision and a reason code. These are the four main and the request token. Both of this snippet is the most important thing in the response of CyberSource. Okay. And this decision actually the one that defines if the card was accepted, rejected, or reviewed. Okay, that's it for the response. Let's move on to the decision manager that we have. The last missing piece of the whole cycle is related to payment authentication. Payment authentication, fraud detection, and decision manager. There's a scene. Let's just have one thing to demonstrate this. There is a scene in the first season of Friends that would demonstrate these concepts accurately, very accurate. The bank calls Rachel, who is one of the protagonists in the show, because she hasn't used her card in a very long time. That's for her is an unusual activity. Let's watch and discuss later. Please tell me if you don't hear the audio. Well, it's going to be a quick one. And as you can see from this method, from this video, The bank is calling one of their clients to see why his credit card, why his or her credit card was not used for a certain amount of time because it's an unusual activity. This is the same thing that happens on online shopping. CyberSource relies on algorithms and patterns to detect high-risk transactions. For example, if your monthly average payments are around, let's say, $250, and suddenly you get charged with $4,000 receipt, that's where CyberSource intervenes. CyberSource algorithms can also detect if the shopper is the real owner of the card. Things like the billing address, the name of the shopper, the IP of the device. We've seen in the request we're sending the IP address. The amount both can all help CyberSource detect fraudulent activity. For example, if your card was issued in the US and suddenly was used in the Middle East, for example, then the bank will give you a call to determine the validity of this transaction. Once something like this happens or occurs, CyberSource will return with a review decision rather than accept. All reviewed orders go through an extra step, security step, called the decision manager. The decision manager can provide extra insights in general for the merchant regarding each transaction. The decision manager allows merchants to set rules for fraud detection based on addresses, credit scores, etc. It even allows merchants to change their rules and see the results instantly via the fairly new CyberSource decision manager replay utility. In the decision manager, the merchant can either accept or reject the transaction. These decisions happens at the CyberSource control panel. We have a control panel for CyberSource called CyberSource Business Center. Okay, so might want to ask this question. The user was authorized. He got a review decision on Salesforce, on the Salesforce side, and an amount of money was discounted from his account. Then the merchant will reject the order in the CyberSource Business Center. How can we really sync up both of these systems? For that, each side should have a decision manager job that loops on all orders with a review flag. Then the job will make a call to the decision manager endpoint to get the final result. If the final decision was a reject, we issue a reverse auth, the final transaction type that we've talked about. We refund the customer. I also believe we had a job session before. I think Noor Qanair did that one. Not sure, but yeah. So if you want to go watch her session, that also would be very helpful to you guys. Okay, that pretty much sums up my payment gateway integration session. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to help.